good evening to you both. And let's begin with the premiers of Alberta and Ontario pressuring the feds to foster a better environment for private sector investment.
There'll be a moment where the rubber hits the road. Like, you can only talk the talk for so long before you start putting some real action around it.
Prime Minister Carney is no Justin Trudeau. He's a business mind. He's run massive multi-billion-dollar businesses, and he's bringing the business approach to the federal government that hasn't had that approach in the last 10 years.
Danielle Smith and Doug Ford have signed memorandums of understanding that will see more Ontario-built cars coming to Alberta, more Alberta alcohol being shipped to Ontario, and on the energy front, plans to study pipeline and railroads that could bring oil and gas to ports in Ontario for export. Donna, there are a few elements at play here, but what's your biggest takeaway from the premiers of Alberta and Ontario coming together here? What's the dominant element for you?
Buckle up. That would be my takeaway, watching that extravaganza with the belt buckle. I think this is amazing. We haven't seen this forever. When Lougheed was staring down Pierre Elliott Trudeau, Ontario, where I come from, was not helpful. Bill Davis was not helpful. We now have a premier in Ontario who is saying, we're a partner with you. We want the same things as you. Let's do it together. I think that is something remarkable, and I'm very excited about it. I think that's a big turning point. And when they sit down together with the, in the end of this month, figuring out what we're going to do with Trump, they've got a plan, and it's a saleable plan. And then they stare at EB in British Columbia saying, why aren't you at this table? Come to this table. I think it's brilliant.
John, these are memorandums of understanding, not necessarily changes or leading the way to changes in legislation. The opposition calls it political theater. What do you see this exercise amounting to?
Well, I agree with Donna. I think it's a positive development. Anytime you have the Premier in Ontario and the Premier of Alberta agreeing to work together to benefit Canada's economy, whether it's by pipeline, whether it's a railway to help Doug Ford with his development of mineral deposits in Northern Ontario. These are positive things. This is a long-term project, though, Michael. We have to realize that. And as you said, these are just memorandums of understanding. But this will mean that the officials in the government of Alberta and the government of Ontario will work together, presumably with the federal government and probably the two provinces in between, Saskatchewan and Manitoba, to try to develop a plan. And this is a positive development. But this is a long-term thing, Michael, before we're going to see a new pipeline, an oil pipeline being built between Alberta and Ontario. I think in the short to medium term, the better prospect for a new oil pipeline to Tidewater would be to revive the old Northern Gateway project from Strathcona County to Kitimat and try to get that one going. And I know that there's going to be problems with that, with opposition from the NDP government in BC. But, the future demand for oil, Michael, is in Asia. That's where half the population lives. And I think that's where you could actually have the demand for the product.
Donna, what does Ontario get out of this? How much benefit does this bring to Doug Ford back home, where the federal political dynamics are certainly different than what we have here in Alberta?
Well, it delivers him product from the West, oil and gas from the West, that it doesn't have to go through the United States. So it bypasses that risk, which is a risk. It's a new risk for us. It's something we haven't worried about in the past going through Michigan, and now we do. More than anything, though, I think what it says is the port in Hudson's Bay and James Bay are actually viable. And we've seen Wab Kinew talk about that a lot. Ford's got critical minerals he wants to mine. He's hell-bent to mine those, and he needs an export facility, and that would be a shared export facility. What he does is have synergy with Wab Kinew, I would say with Saskatchewan, one with Alberta. They all want the same things. I know it probably doesn't make as much sense as a West pipeline, and I agree with that, but politics isn't a logic game most of the time. This may not be the best option, but it's a viable option, and the timing may be right. So I think he gets a lot of buy-in for the kinds of things that Doug Ford needs.
John, to Donna's point, there is synergy with the premiers to the east, Mo Kinew, Doug Ford. Where does that leave EB in this conversation, the premier from BC?
Well, of course, Michael, that's going to be the tough nut to crack. The BC NDP have never been supportive of additional oil pipelines. And you'll recall back in 2017 when David Eby was the Minister of Justice and Attorney General in John Horgan's government, he led the fight against the Trans Mountain Pipeline expansion project. So he's not keen on this. There are those strong elements in BC in support of a new oil pipeline, particularly where the oil and gas industry is located in BC, up in the northeast and across the north. So there is a constituency for this in BC. But, when you want to get down to the granular level of the politics of this, Michael, you have to realize that for the BC NDP, their base of support is Metro Vancouver and Metro Victoria. It isn't the interior. The interior of BC is conservative country, both federally and provincially. And there is support for this in the interior, but where the NDP holds its support, Vancouver and Victoria, there isn't as much support. So, David Eby is catering to his supporters, his constituency, by being, at best non-committal and at worst not supportive of a new pipeline to the West Coast.
Donna, like all of the politicians out there, the PM also in Calgary in recent days, signaling to the media there in his comments that a pipeline project is highly likely to be put on the fast track list for approval. How does that play with messaging that we're hearing now from the premiers of Alberta and Ontario?
It aligns perfectly, and I have to give credit to the Calgary Stampede. A lot of times bringing people together in a setting like this, which they're forced to be together. They have to ride alongside each other in the parade. They have to be together. And it forces people to deliver messages that are aligned. And people are asking those questions. It's a logical question for us to be asking in Calgary and in Alberta. And he has to answer those questions. I think it's a very significant point in time here. We are all celebrating in Alberta, not just the Stampede.
We heard from Peter Guthrie off the top this evening, who, along with fellow independent MLA Scott Sinclair, are building an effort to revive the Progressive Conservative Association of Alberta. John, how much of an appetite do you see there being under the Conservative tent for a move away from the direction of the UCP, an embrace of the ideology that comes with revival of the PC brand?
Well, I suspect that there is some support for this idea. People, hearkening back to the halcyon days of the Progressive Conservative Party of Alberta. But the problem, Michael, is in Alberta, just like the other Western provinces, we really have just a two-party system now, where we have a center-left NDP and a center-right Conservative Party. And it is the same case in Manitoba, Saskatchewan, and BC. So it's a tough nut to crack for anybody who wants to create a new political party and a new centrist political party. And we saw that, Michael, with the Alberta Party that tried its best over the course of 2 or 3 elections to carve out, a space for itself in the center. But at the end of the day, it just crashed out and burned. And the last election we saw was literally just a race between the UCP and the NDP. So, Peter Guthrie and Scott Sinclair have got their work cut out for them, not just getting the signatures on creating the party in the first place, but then to build a political organization and to build constituency associations in the 87 ridings, Michael. It's going to be a real tough job to do. So, it'll be interesting to see what happens.
All right, Donna, you were elected as a Progressive Conservative MLA. There was a point where you sought leadership of the party. How does this move by Peter Guthrie and Scott Sinclair resonate with you? How much is there in a name?
Actually, one thing you missed was that I sat independent. And I think I understand their quest to want to resurrect the PC party. There were really glorious days. And I think some days that Mark Carney looks like a progressive conservative. So it has a cachet. I understand that. But I sat as an independent because I was on Treasury Board and I was asked to approve $3 billion coming out of the Heritage Savings Trust Fund to a fund that the Premier could direct. And I opposed that vehemently and couldn't change people's minds. So I sat as an independent. I didn't leave my party. I sat as an independent and I returned to that party. What I'm hearing from Mr. Guthrie is what I see is concerns about leadership, not about the party itself. I didn't see him saying anything different from what I've heard from the UCP in terms of party values. He just seems to have a very big concern about leadership, and that's a different matter. So I don't know why you try to create a new party. I just think you need to fix the one you've got and work harder at that. So I kind of look at it quite differently than he is right now.
John, to what degree could this potentially change the political dynamic in Alberta? What's hinging on the success of the efforts of Scott Sinclair and Peter Guthrie?
Well, it has the potential to, Michael. But as I said in my previous answer, it's going to take a lot of work over the coming months and the next year to try to get the Progressive Conservative Association of Alberta back to a point where it can actually challenge to win seats. You know, it's one thing to say you're going to resurrect a political party or create a new party, but it's another thing to actually have the resources, financial and volunteers and organization to do it. Like a political party is a huge enterprise. You have to have a provincial executive. You have to have a fundraising capacity. And more importantly, if they want to be serious about it, they would have to build constituency associations in 87 ridings. This is no small task, Michael. So they have a big job in front of them to try to do this. It'll be interesting to see if they can do it. But, you know, in answer to your question, it has the potential to be a factor, because if they're successful in doing this, they would obviously take votes away primarily from the UCP, although perhaps somewhat from the NDP. So they have the potential to have an impact, but they've got a lot of work ahead of them still, Michael.
Donna, before the build out of all that political enterprise that John just pointed out, how much opposition are Guthrie and Sinclair likely to face from within their own Conservative fold?
Oh, I think significant. I mean, they alluded to the sovereignty question, which is a really burning question, and whether or not the leader of the UCP is supportive, you know, a closet separatist. I think that's, you know, we're all hearing noise like that all the time. What they need to focus on right now is getting Alberta on track with the rest of Canada with a clear strategy and a clear response to the United States and Trump's tariffs. This feels like a huge distraction from that. I'm a conservative. I find it very distracting. I don't want to talk about a new party. I want to talk about how do conservatives and all Albertans participate in developing a strategy where we feel stronger in confederation. I don't think the ballot question is going to be, should we separate from the rest of Canada or should we not separate? The question is, how do we build a better Alberta, stronger Alberta within Canada? And that will require some change. That requires a lot of work. I just think this is a distraction from all of that.
So, John, maybe last word to you. Music to the ears of the NDP, potential threat to the support that maybe even brought Naheed Nenshi to leadership a year ago?
You know, it's really hard to say, Michael, because, you know, in the last provincial election in 2023, the NDP picked up a lot of votes from people that weren't New Democrats. These are people who had voted Progressive Conservative in the past, but couldn't stomach voting for Danielle Smith and the UCP in this last election. So, you know, if this enterprise was able to actually get off the ground and be a viable political party, it could actually draw some old PC voters away from people who voted NDP in the last provincial election. But I do think the bigger threat would be to the UCP because, you know, they would have the name Conservative in their name. And at the end of the day, that's what half of Albertans vote for. They vote for that brand. They vote for that name recognition of a Conservative party, whether it's the United Conservative Party provincially or the Conservative Party of Canada federally.
Don, I think I have time enough to squeeze in one more quick one for you. Maybe to your point earlier, could there be a door opening up to welcome them back into the UCP fold?
I always think that door is open. I don't think they should ever give up on that, and I don't think the rest of the Conservative caucus should either. It needs to be aired. There's something going on there from a leadership perspective, and I think it's worthy of that, pushing that door open a little bit wider.
All right, we'll have to leave it there for time. Good to see you both. Thank you kindly.
Thanks,
Yahoo!
Michael.